Good evening, brothers and sisters. We're here again, back with a great program tonight. We're excited to have you on. We're glad that you can join us tonight to talk about reparations. This is a topic that we have discussed here before on this platform and 360. Um, of course, you've heard our views. Of those who have been following us for quite a while know that we've talked about this in terms of what we view it and what we think about reparations. But we're going to hopefully hear from an invited guest, Deadria Farmer-Paellman. Excuse me if I'm saying her name wrong, but she'll be on to correct it. So hopefully tonight she's supposed to appear, and if not, we were still going with the conversation, but we're still waiting for her to arrive now. So yeah, this conversation is going to be open as always. We're always going to encourage you to participate in the chat. I'm gonna let Isaac kind of go over some of the house rules, but I just wanted to welcome everybody tonight and be ready for a good conversation.
G, it's wonderful to be with you as always, good brother. And as you said, we're going to have a great conversation tonight, one way or the other. We hope that our esteemed guest is able to join us. She hasn't checked in as of yet, so we hope that she's okay. If it doesn't work out, then Grant and I will, discuss some of the things that we've prepared in the way of reparations, and hopefully she can join us whenever she makes the time. But as if you've been with us before, 360 Collective is a social commentary group whose goal and aim is to confront and discuss and surface issues of race and skin color in America, in the hope that we can bring people together to form bonds of change, transformation, and ultimately revolution. And we've had guests on in the past, such as the Black Panther Party. We've had legendary MCs with us, such as Sadat X and Big Shug. We've had immigration activists with us. We've had folks from Minneapolis there on the ground doing work through the George Floyd case, and others in, around, and between. So, from those experiences that we love to have open dialogue. We love to have our listeners join in the conversation. And today will be no different. We hope that we hear from you in the chat. If you hear something that resonates with you, we hope you react to it. We hope that you ask questions if there's something that you want to know about that we have not yet discussed. And if you want to join us directly in the conversation, we will drop a link into the chat in just a few minutes here where you can join us and talk directly with us and share your ideas, your thoughts, and your philosophy on the given topic at hand. Again, we do have very strong views about reparations. We feel very strongly about them, as you'll hear, but that doesn't mean that we're not open to listen to other people who have different views or have more informed views than we do, because we believe strongly in doing the knowledge together, co-constructing knowledge with you, the listener, with our guests when we do have them, and otherwise. So that's the way that we get down here at 360 Collective. We hope that you'll stick with us for the bulk of this program tonight. If you have not liked our Facebook page, you should definitely do that. We also now have a YouTube page that is just getting underway as well. So we hope that you subscribe to that in addition to following us on Facebook. And if you haven't checked out our website, definitely do that, 360collective.online. Lots of really interesting content there for you to unpack and digest. So with that said, Brother Grant, I think that we're just about ready. I'm checking the chat. We don't have anyone checking in just yet in the chat. But again, we hope that if you are with us, that you are going to get active in the chat, respond, ask questions, and even jump into the conversation as we get flowing here in just another minute.
All right. Yeah, we'll just take a few minutes to see if we get anybody on. While we're waiting, though, just as Brother Isaac expressed, all our conversations are open dialogue. We're not coming to you as just one voice. We want to hear as a collective. That's why we call it 360 Collective. We believe that We need many voices to make up the make change, and to really, when it calls for a revolution, it's going to take more than just us three. So we definitely would like to hear from you. Hope we can if we do not get our guest on, our faithful soldier BJ is here. All right, brother always definitely shows us love and definitely supports us. We definitely appreciate that. He was on last. Yeah, he was on last week, so we're glad to have him on for this week too. As I was saying, if we don't have our guests that come on, we definitely want to hear from you. So we'll put the link in the chat so you can come on and talk with us live. The first time around we did this conversation, I remember we got a lot of flack. The title, though, probably threw a lot of people off and made some people upset. And when you talk about reparations in general, I think that it really ruffles a lot of feathers for a lot of people, because the first thing they think about is it's a handout. Black folks always want a handout. And why should we go into our pockets and give you a handout when I had nothing to do with it? So we're gonna explore that tonight. We're definitely gonna keep that in the back of our minds as one of the things we're going to talk about as the reason why we should definitely reach into our pockets and do this. But not only that, more so the attitudes though of a lot of people who feel as if they don't own anything. It's not their fault. All Black folks want is handouts.
Now hold on, G. Hold on now. You glazed past something real quickly there.
What's that?
You mentioned the title of the first conversation that we had, but you didn't actually say the title. You want me to say what it was? You remember what it was? I can say it.
Yeah, go ahead, man. Go ahead and say the title.
We called it Reparations, the White Man's Burden. And that definitely ruffled some feathers. That ruffled some feathers.
It did. It did. But in fact, I mean, the title in itself really did speak to, I think, what it feels like it is. It's a burden to really to admit that reparations are definitely due. Rightfully so. It's definitely due. How we get it, that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. So, we can at least tell who the sister is who she is. And then if she does not go on, it's not here in about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, we'll go on and just go on as normal. So do you want to at least tell the people who she is?
Sure, I can do that. Okay. So our guest for the night, whom we hope is okay, and we hope still can join us, her name is Deadria Farmer-Paellman. And Paellman is credited for popularizing the slavery reparations movement through her groundbreaking research exposing corporate complicity in slavery. In January 2000, she exposed and secured an unprecedented public apology from Aetna Incorporated for writing insurance policies on the lives of enslaved Africans with slaveholders as the beneficiaries in the 1800s. Her research linking various blue chip corporations to the slave trade led them to make a $20 million payment to the African American community in 2005. Her litigation strategy in a case filed against slave trade corporations for consumer fraud resulted in the first reparations court victory in American history, in 2006. And today, she is the executive director of a group called the Restitution Study Group. And we'll share that information with you later. We'll put something on our screen. But if you're interested in learning more about Dr. Paellman's research and her organization, you can go to RSGIN as in Nancy, Corp, CORP.org. So RSGincorp.org is where you can find the Restitution Study Group. So she has a wealth of knowledge about the cause of reparations, specifically the economic strategies and the legal strategies that it takes to reasonably formalize and win a reparations package at the federal level. So we hope that she can join us. If not, we can reschedule for another time. But that is our guest. We hope that she still joins us.
Okay.
Gee,
Well,
I think it's important for us to talk first about why reparations. Why
okay.
reparations at all? I mean, you and I, we've had this conversation for the better part of 25 years, and we've had it with other people for the same amount of time. But for our listeners who may be curious about the issue and may want to know more about why reparations, why is this such a pressing issue we feel in the nation, especially when it comes to equalizing the economic playing field in this country? I know that we had some notes and some research prepared. Was there any particular place that you wanted to start with some of those figures?
I mean, let's address the wealth gap.
Okay. All right. So the wealth gap in America is such that even though Black Americans constitute between 12 and 13% of the national population, Black Americans hold less than 3% of the nation's wealth. And when we talk about the median family wealth in this country, the discrepancy is even wider and more desperate. $17,000 approximately per Black family to $138,000 per white family in America. Those two statistics alone should tell us that something is deeply wrong in America. What's your reaction to that, G?
This is probably the most frustrating piece about the fact we're sitting here arguing about reparations and whether or not it's definitely it's warranted for African Americans today, is because we live in this world of the have and the have-nots. And I know there's some people out there saying, well, I'm not Black and I'm poor. But when you talk about the numbers you just said, there's still no comparison with the gap that's there. And it's a known fact. We didn't make these numbers up. We didn't fudge the numbers. This is the reality. So you drive past the predominantly Black neighborhood and you look over there, you say, all those people, they deserve it, or look how they're living. Do you think those people really want to live like that? This is what the hand that we've been dealt. And so I can't believe that we're actually talking and discussing, debating this issue in 2022 when we were forced to come to this country and work for free labor for 450 years and then suffered through another 150 of discriminatory practices, Black codes in the South, Jim Crow laws, and so on and so forth. That we actually are sitting here debating or even having this discussion of money that can definitely lift those out of poverty into a better situation. And so the wealth gap is the most eye-opening piece of this, is because numbers are numbers. You just can't, it's not a farce. This is the truth. So I think that people can look at those numbers and say, there's a problem. And so my reaction to this is that it's frustrating to know that those numbers have been there for decades, and we keep looking at it, look at them. HR 40 has been on the table for all this time, and the numbers keep getting worse. The pandemic has definitely exacerbated those numbers in 2020 and 2021. And people still had a problem and was talking about how not only Black people were getting the money from the $1,500, the STEMI, as people call them, the STEMI checks, but everybody was getting them. And nobody had a problem with people getting those STEMI checks. But if it was only going to Black folks, then it would be a problem. So that's my reaction to that.
What do you say to someone, G, who says that America is not built that way? Yeah, slavery was bad, and maybe if we could have done something about it at the time, that would have been the right and just thing to do. But it was 150 years ago, and America is no longer a racist place. America is the land of opportunity. Racism is a thing of the past. It's time for Black people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. What's your reaction to that?
Wow. and that I've heard that. Well, number one, we know that racism is alive and well. That certainly is not the case. But if you look at economics in general, let's take a homeless person, for example. Okay. So the homeless person, let's say he's middle-aged and he has a second chance on life. That person gets a job, right? Let's say he's maybe 35 years old, just now starting life. He was homeless his whole life. 35, he gets a job, make a little bit of money. Well, his life expectancy might be another 30 years. If he, male life expectancy is a little bit shorter than women. And typically men tend to die off around between 55 and 65 is when a lot of males die. That's just what it is. I know we're living longer today. But if that person only has, let's say another, if he's lucky, another 30 years to save money. Now, mind you, he has to pay for expenses. He has to do everything else, buy food. So in 30 years, he may only be able to save maybe, let's throw a number out there. Let's say he saved $20,000, which is probably won't even be the case. But let's just say he did. That $20,000, all that man has. If he passes $20,000 down to the next person, what in the world do you think that person is going to be able to do in today's society with $20,000? Okay, not much of anything. I mean, it can maybe get you some places, but it can't get you an education. It can't buy you a car. It can't buy a house. They can't do much of anything. And this is what we're talking about. When you're giving somebody who's fresh out of the cotton field, and we're not even talking about $20,000, absolutely nothing. But when you think about the starting point for Black folks, who even chance to even get a start, and hope you can live to live 30 years, like an example I gave before. But when you just are starting with absolutely nothing, and you're able to work a menial job making maybe minimum wage, you can't even save $20,000 to $30,000 in your lifespan. So we're talking about people, because now we know racism is still alive and well. During that 30-year, if they're able to make it to 60 years old, the 60 years, they're probably spending so much money just trying to live, they don't have anything to pass down. So when you look at passing down wealth, that is something that has been able to happen in this country with the terms of white wealth. They've been able to pass things down. Even this homeless white man, that's the example, was able to pass down money, but it was something. But if I start with nothing and able to pass down nothing, then why in the world can't you see that there is a need for a leg up, some kind of head start, some kind of economical gains to be able to create generational wealth? Which, in fact, if you look at the wealth gap in this country, it is definitely because of the fact that white folks have had a 450-year start. When we were given 450 years of free labor, they were still making money all those years. So even though it was so long, 150 years ago, we're still feeling the effects, and we're still living the effects of slavery. It would take probably 4 to 5 generations, if not more, to be able to catch up. I would say probably 10 generations to be able to catch up to the amount of money that white people in this country were able to accumulate over those 450 years. So I have nothing to pass down, generation after generation after generation. There has to be a point in time we need to say, look, this group of people needs to have some type of I'm not going to call it a handout, some type of leverage, some type of leg up in this country. And it may not be money. It could be different. We're going to talk about that, different forms of reparations. But there needs to be some kind of leverage in order to lessen the wealth gap. And it's there solely because of the fact that we never got much of a start in this country in the first place.
Yeah, G, I think you're on to something there. And I think what's important also to consider when we talk about the bootstraps mentality is that America has never been about the bootstraps. At no point. In fact, if America had been about the bootstraps mentality in the very first place, there would have never been chattel slavery in America. Never would have been. So let's begin there first and foremost. But outside of racial discrimination, which we'll get into in just a second, outside of the experience of slavery itself, so even outside of the damage that was done to Black Americans as a result of the institution of slavery for hundreds of years, we have this thing called systematic racism as well, which was in play outside of chattel slavery. And I want to give you an example to build a little bit more on what you were talking about, G.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a map of what are called land grant colleges and universities. Now I want you to look at all those dots, red dots, 1862. These were colleges formed in order to enhance the ability of the American people to cultivate the land, to develop the land, to farm the land. Notice all those red dots in 1862. These colleges were part of a massive, what you would call today, infrastructure bill to fund the expansion of the United States westward, to develop already existing territory and land within the borders of the United States. And through what was called the Homestead Act, white Americans were able to enroll in college for either no cost or little cost, and were also given lots of land to develop on their own. And so in 1862, the bulk of Black Americans were still enslaved. And those who lived free, relatively, had very little access, if any, to the Homestead Act, to these colleges, or to the land itself. And so when we talk about land ownership in this country and wealth and the wealth gap, $17,000 per Black family to $140,000 for a white family, it is impossible to talk about that without also talking about this. Additionally, post-World War II, there was something called the GI Bill, which paid for veterans to go back to college, earn a college degree, to get mortgages for dirt cheap mortgage credit rates, loan rates. And again, very few Black Americans were able to leverage the GI Bill for their own benefit in the way that white Americans were. It wasn't because Black Americans hadn't gone off and fought in the war. It wasn't because Black Americans didn't want access to the GI Bill. It was because they were systematically denied access to these things. So now we're talking about two milestones in American history, two of arguably the biggest pieces of legislation ever to cross the president's desk in this country, in the Homestead Act and the GI Bill. Two bills which were absolutely instrumental in the development of this country from an agrarian state to an industrial one, to a state limited to a handful of small states in the Midwest and East, to broad, big states out West. And Black people were systematically excluded from these two major infrastructure bills. And there are more examples along the way, but we went from 1862 to 1952, 90 years. In between that, you have Jim Crow in the South, which we can assume our listeners know something about. But these are great examples of how it came to be that the wealth gap is what it is today. The other thing to consider about the wealth gap that we need to pay close attention to is that the wealth gap has nothing to do with education. Even when controlled for education, when you look at Black families with master's degrees, with doctorates, compared to the income of whites with the same level of education, their income trails that of white people. So education is controlled for when we talk about income level or average median family income. Education makes no difference to the average Black family when it comes to education. They still trail white counterparts in that respect. And when we talk about today, so not even talking about 1862, not even talking about 1952, there's a $23 billion gap in funding between schools that are comprised of mostly Black students and those schools comprised of mostly white students. Now, even in your heart of hearts, if you can't let go of the bootstraps mentality, if you're going to rock with the bootstraps mentality, come hell or high water, there's nothing we can tell you now to make you change your opinion about that. How is it fair? How is it just that schools with mostly Black populations are underfunded by $23 billion relative to schools comprised of mostly white students? How is that fair? So I'll leave it there because I know G, you may have some more to say, but I think it's important that we understand the depth and the magnitude of not only this country's racism historically, but even up to and including today in the 2020s, how systematic racism still afflicts us. And make no mistake, I don't believe necessarily that superintendents, school district leaders, even elected leaders mean to do harm. I believe that most people who are elected to office, as much as I may disagree with them, and I could be naive, this could be my privilege talking, but I believe that most people want to do right by others. But systematic racism has nothing to do with your intention. It has nothing to do with your core beliefs. It has to do with what the system is allowed to do minus our intervention. So imagine systematic racism like a rubber band. Rubber band's natural state is to sit relaxed. If we do nothing and we allow that rubber band to sit without being stretched, that's what it will do. We have to actively work against systematic racism. We have to pull that rubber band as far as we possibly can. We have to extend it as much as we possibly can, because the minute we stop, the rubber band snaps back into place. So as long as we allow for the system which created these inequities to continue, then they will, even when our best friends are Black, even when we are in interracial marriages. I'm talking to my people now. Even when you go to the jazz club and you get down with people who look different than you, right? It does not matter who you are. It matters what the system is. And so that's an important thing that I think we need to understand. When we talk about systematic racism, we're not talking about a white man with horns behind a control desk, pulling levers and pushing buttons to keep anyone who looks different from him down. We're talking about a system which was constructed and has been allowed to persist in oppressing Black and brown people in America. So I'll stop there, G.
Great points, Brother Isaac. Great points. Well said. And I hope everybody is definitely getting something out of this and listening and can hear the passion in which we're speaking about the subject, because it is something I feel as if you have to hear the passion. You have to feel the sense of urgency, because I think this is an issue we've been talking about for far too long. You made some good points, and what I want to kind of expound on is the fact that along the lines of the wealth gap in the country. We talk about ownership in this country, when one of the greatest assets that the American dream sells everyone is ownership, and one that white folks have done very well at. And I know we'll say, okay, it's not necessarily a racial thing. It's really more of a class thing because it's the 1% against the 99% of that whole. There was a whole movement about that not too long ago. Wall Street versus the Main Street. But when you look at terms of assets in this country and what people typically hold as their greatest asset they have, and that's a house, home ownership. Many Black households strive for home ownership, but the main asset that white people have in this country, most Black folks can't even afford to have. Mainly because we know all about predatory lending, we all know about redlining, we all know about banks not willing to lend a dime to Black people for various reasons. But if I've been in this country working for free labor for 450 years, I had to deal with 150 years of discrimination, and still it's not over. That's not. We're just talking about Jim Crow, things like that. That's been abolished, but we know that racism and we know that discriminatory practices still exist today. But if we know that has happened to a certain group of people, the least you can do is understand that the one thing they can strive for is to have a home. But in this country, the opportunity isn't there. The second thing is very most people concerned will say is a big asset is owning a business. African Americans own fewer than 2% of small businesses with any employees, but they make up of 13% of U.S. population. So we make up 13%, but we only own 2% of the small businesses in this country. In comparison to white households, they own 82%. 82% of small employer firms, even though they account for only 60% of the U.S. population. Those numbers are going to be vastly different no matter where you put it at, no matter what sector, no matter what type of comparison you do. There's going to be these huge gaps between African Americans and white Americans. And when you factor in other races, actually, some of them come even before African Americans, immigrants who just got here maybe 10, 20 years ago, are still faring far better than those of us who have been here for almost 500 years. Well, 500 years plus. It's mind-blowing, it's frustrating. But I do understand. I think we have to make the people, and you as I say people, you listening, and others who are who have heard about reparations to understand how we get the reparations. I think that if we have a candid conversation, even though we've presented you with great facts, figures, and we presented you with data, that's one thing. But I think for the average person to understand the urgency of this and why we're even talking about this is we need to probably talk about how the reparations will be paid out. Because I think people keep talking about why would you get a check and you don't deserve it. Your parents weren't slaves, you weren't a slave. Why do you deserve any money? What Isaac just talked about, what I've been talking about this evening, are plenty of reasons why. But I think we can explore the type of reparations that we possibly can have, and it's not always going to necessarily be a dollar amount in terms of a check. So I would like to ask those who are listening, and we're going to give our ideas, but those who are listening, how do you think reparations, if we were to have reparations for African Americans, what do you think will be a proper way to disperse that money? Or again, not necessarily money itself in a dollar amount, but how do we disperse reparations in this country? What does it fall under? Is it a check? Is it a scholarship? Is it money towards a down payment on a house? Is it free college for all African Americans? Those are some of the ideas we're going to be toying around with. But I'm curious to get your reaction, Isaac, first, and then I'll be watching the chat to see if others have any other ideas.
Okay, sounds good, G. So I think as we start to think about what reparations could look like, there's a few things for us to consider. Some of these numbers are going to blow your mind, G. I know you know some of these numbers already, but I'll say them again for our friends who are listening. Anthropologist and author Jason Hickel, in his 2018 book called The Divide, Global Inequality from Conquest to Free Markets, estimated that chattel slavery in this country amounted to approximately 222,500 million hours of forced labor between 1619 and 1865. I'll say that number again, 222 million hours, almost 223 million hours. And he said that valued at the minimum wage, just the minimum wage, that amount today would be worth $97 trillion, not billion, 97 trillion with a T dollars. Now, that is a liberal estimate, one of the more liberal estimates that are out there. There are other estimates that put the number between 17 billion and a few trillion. There's one University of Connecticut professor, Thomas Creamer. He estimates somewhere between $6 and $14 trillion. And so those are some of the figures that we're working with when it comes to the dollar amount that would be attached to a reparations package. Now, along with that, I think it's important to consider a few things. We just spent several $billions on a COVID-19 vaccine and on unemployment relief and economic relief for the nation as we suffered through the COVID-19 pandemic. Billions and billions of dollars. In 2015, it was estimated that the Troubled Asset Relief Program cost the country about $37 billion. The war in Iraq we're still paying for that now. Still paying for that. That's going to cost the country in the neighborhood of at least $4 trillion. And that was for a war that began in 2003 and continued until what? The middle of President Obama's presidency. So call it 10, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
That war alone cost $4 trillion. $4 trillion. You know what our defense budget was last year, G?
Somewhere in the trillions for sure.
It was almost $1 trillion.
Okay.
And it's been pushing $1 trillion for the last decade. So we call it 10 years to be safe. Let's call it $7 trillion. So between the war in Iraq, $4 trillion, between the military budget of $7 trillion in just the last decade, and then the other programs that we've initiated to save our economy, to rescue banks, to develop a vaccine, we're talking about trillions and we're talking about $20 trillion probably. Not to mention the weapons that we sell and give to other countries. Not to mention the refugees that we take into this country and should, from Afghanistan and now from Ukraine, from Haiti. Oh, sorry, not Haiti. We didn't take any refugees from Haiti, but from Ukraine and from Afghanistan. Taking people from those countries in costs us hundreds of billions of dollars over time. So it's like Tupac said, and I know this meme has been out there. I'm going to say it anyway. Y'all have heard it. But they have money for wars but can't feed the poor. Don't let anybody tell you that this country can't afford reparations. Given the places that we go to war, given the amount of money we spend on our armed forces, our budget, our defense budget is so big that the next 4 most militarized countries in the world don't equal our budget. Our military is so big that if you add up all the military bases in the world, G, all of them in the world, it still doesn't equal the number of bases that the United States has scattered throughout the planet.
Wow.
You hear what I'm saying? You can add up
Right.
all the military bases from Russia on their territory or otherwise. Iran, Ukraine, North Korea, add it all up. Add up all of the soldiers dispersed across the globe from other countries. It doesn't equal the spread of our military. So again, when Tupac said they got money for wars and can't feed the poor, it wasn't just a rhyme. He wasn't just coming up with something to rhyme. He was speaking objective truth and fact. So I'll leave it with that, G. I know you may have some ideas, maybe something has come through in the chat about suggestions, ideas for what a reparations package could look like. So I'll jump back in after you share a little bit more about what you're thinking and what our viewers might be thinking about.
Okay. So let's look and see. Eddie Thomas says cut the check and land. Okay, so you want that 40 acres and a mule, huh? All right, we'll take installments, he says again. BJ says free college is a good idea. Okay. That's a good idea. All right. So Joyce Williams says that in a variety of forms: land, money, education, business startups, investments, rollbacks, healthcare, business development programs, farms, jobs at every level, at all. So yeah. And Eddie jumped back in. The debt needs to be paid. So I like what everyone said here. Joyce, you had some pretty good ideas as well that I haven't considered. Farms. That's an interesting piece right there, especially when we understand that we were tricked into sharecropping right after slavery in the first place. Farming is still a huge piece of economic wealth in this country, even though they're facing quite a bit of issues right now due to the fact that most of the farmers are controlled by the government now. But still, it's a huge economic resource because we all need food, right? So that is something that I haven't considered, but that's something I definitely can take note of. But the bottom line is this: we're trying to prove to you tonight, as all the facts and figures we're spewing out, and Isaac has so eloquently delivered in what he just stated, of all the wealth all the money, that we are spending all over the globe on areas that we should not be spending in the first place. We took that money and we did say, okay, hey, here's a pot for college. Here's a pot towards healthcare. Here's a pot. I'm just reading some of the things you just said. Joyce said, here's a pot for business development startups. And you decide which pot you need. Maybe there isn't no one fix all solution here, but there are different pots in which we can tap in. And somebody's going to say, why in the world do you need so many pots to tap in when you have the capability yourself to get it without anybody giving you anything? All the data we just gave you when it comes to the wealth gap, the education gap, when it comes to home ownership, when it comes to businesses, there's gaps everywhere. And that's prior to 2020. The wealth gap widened again during the pandemic. So not only we were in a bad shape before, but we were in an even worse shape now, and for several reasons. For the reason why the widening happened amongst black and white wealth during the recessions we had in 2000, the prior recession, and even this one now. So first of all, on average, black workers always have the worst labor market experiences than white workers. They suffer from higher unemployment, longer spells of unemployment, earlier layoffs in recession, later rehiring in recovery, more job instability and lower wages, less access to goods. Stable jobs means that African Americans have fewer opportunities to make money, as well as more need to rely on their savings because they face more labor market risk. So it's a nightmare to have to try to navigate in the world where you have so many obstacles to overcome. The ones I just named can make somebody pull their hair out. I'm the first person to get fired. I'm the last person to hire. How am I ever going to gain wealth? Well, I want to go back to school. Well, I may want to take out a bunch of loans. I got to repay them back. Well, in the meantime, I'm still trying to juggle a family as I'm trying to go back to school to get this education and get a better job. Now I have to somehow raise a child off only getting stipends or possibly refund checks from borrowed money from the government in order to take care of my household and still try to get an education. And then once I get the piece of paper, then I somehow can get a job, but because of my name isn't the right name, I'm discriminated against because of my name. And then also because of the fact that I may not have went to the best institution. I might only went to a community college or some type of online school. Got to get a chance to go to the best state college with a big name attached or Ivy League. So I'm not the first resume you're gonna pick. Or you may look at my address and realize where I live at and understand that I'm a Black person and you don't want to hire me, no matter what my name is. And then, oh, by the way, during this particular period of time of me trying to get education and a job, I have health issues. Well, I don't have any health care because I am a student. So now I have all type of health issues. And this is all a short period of time, by the way, that all this is happening. And this is a small snippet of the type of world an African-American in this country has to navigate on a daily basis. So damn right we need reparations. There has to be some kind of way to leverage all what's happened to us, all that we go through on a daily basis. The pandemic even made things even worse now for Black households. So prior to the pandemic, I believe there was HR 40 was actually in conversation, and there were some conversations about, and it really got to the point of, I believe there was some, Danny Glover was involved, Tennessee, his name wrong.
Yeah, Tennessee
Coates was involved in that, and they were actually in a hearing in which they gave some testimonies in which they felt that reparations were needed. Sheila Jackson Lee was involved, and so it ended up in a stalemate, and they said that there wasn't any money for reparations at the time, and then COVID hits, and then trillions of dollars appeared out of nowhere to give stimulus checks and PPE loans and this, that, and the other. A year later, all this money came out of nowhere that could have been used for reparations. The fact of the matter, folks, is that I don't believe this country really wants to give us anything. And honestly, I don't think I'm going to sit here and wait on any longer to wait on this country to give me a dime. This is what we're talking about. 360 Collective is what we're here talking about. What can you do? What can we do in order to create our own pot of money? Because that's what's going to end up probably taking. And I know some states have taken some. There are 11 mayors in this country who have taken a stance, and they're gonna give out reparations on a local level. We need to discuss that as well, because it may not come from a national fund. It may have to come locally. And I know some states, some not states, but some cities in this country have already given some money out. So we can definitely discuss that as being an option as well. What do you think? Should we depend on it come from a federal level? I know the Biden-Harris administration have tossed around some ideas. I'm not really even dependent on it, honestly. Or should we just really focus on doing things from a grassroots effort and try to get this done on a local level?
G, you raised a great point, and I know that when we were promoting this event online, there was some discussion about that very topic, and there were some. It sounded like some comrades who are in the work, who are advocating strenuously for a national reparations package, who don't seem at all to feel that a local movement towards reparations would be sufficient. Not that it shouldn't happen, but that a true reparations package can only be provided and funded at the national level. But I tend to agree with you, G, that activating in your own community, whether that's going to a city council meeting, whatever your local form of governments is, making a public statement in favor of reparations. Just doing that will attract people of like mind to you. And from there, ideas will begin to flow. In Evanston, here in the Chicago, I'm in Chicago, but this is outside of Chicago in the north suburbs. A reparations plan designed and focused on housing was erected over the course of the last year. And in Chicago, there was briefly a small movement for reparations. There was a bill in the city council that ultimately died. And I'm trying to work with some of the aldermen who piloted that bill with not a lot of success initially, and they don't seem interested in revisiting that. But at the University of Chicago, there's a local group right outside the campus and a group of interested students from the campus who are engaged in a fight with the university to orchestrate a reparations package for residents right around the university there. And I'm in contact with some of those comrades. They were invited to come on tonight, but unfortunately couldn't make it. But we continue to revisit the topic of reparations. So hopefully we can get them on at another time. I think the value of activating locally is that the more that these small movements happen, the more the concept of reparations becomes part of our national discourse. Right now, reparations seems like a one-off. It seems like an aspirational thing that can't ever happen. The truth is that it's already happening in many places across the country, albeit on a local level. And so when small municipalities, when small groups of people win victories, however small, it means something on the national level. There's a family out in California who won a plot of land back last year that had been stolen from the local municipality there in California. It was a beachfront property worth millions of dollars. This family's great grandfather owned it, and it was taken from them. They regained that property just last year, and as a result, now have access to a plot of land that's worth millions and millions of dollars. So those sorts of things in the national discourse start to feed the psychology that reparations is real and reparations can happen. And so just to build on a couple more of those ideas that we've heard from our friends in the chat, G, there's a few other things that I think we need to think about in terms of how to pay for reparations. In addition to what I mentioned before with the military budget and how much money goes towards that, there's the possibility of a cannabis tax. Robert Smith proposed a 10-year corporate investment of 2% of their net income. And then also the 10 largest banks could also invest money to the tune of about $19 billion. This could go directly towards funding Black businesses and Black startups. There's definitely a need for criminal justice reform that should be part of reparations, but should happen even without reparations. More access to better health care. So nationalized health care is something that everybody in this country deserves, but in particular, it's something that could be part of a reparations package for Black Americans. We talk about education reform. Some of our comrades and friends mentioned already access to free college, but also redesigning education formulas across the country. So a national education bill that forbids local jurisdictions from funding education, from funding schools based on zip code. That is a racist policy that has its roots in redlining and in Jim Crow, and it should be stopped immediately. And then we can also put some more bite into the equal opportunity laws, which were passed in the 1960s. There were some passed specifically in 1968 that were supposed to equalize the playing field when it comes to access to housing and to abolish redlining practices and hiring practices. As you said a second ago, G, there's a study done not long ago where the exact same resume was mailed out to employers looking to hire, and exact same resumes were mailed out with Black sounding names and then also with white sounding names. Predictably, those resumes, exactly the same in every other way compared to the Black resumes, Those resumes with white sounding names were called back at a clip of 25%. Resumes with black sounding names were called back at a clip of only 10%. So when we talk about the employment gap today, that's just one more thing to add to what you said before, G. I know you're speaking from a very personal perspective. So I'm adding a little bit of data to build upon the experience that you were elaborating on before. But today, if an employer is found to have violated an equal opportunity law, there's a fine. There's a fine. What about putting somebody behind bars for something like that? What about finding the person who is guilty of the law, not just the corporation, not just the company, but the person? If it's murder to rob somebody, to break into their house and steal the gold jewelry up in the master bedroom, it should also be as wrong and as punishable to rob somebody of their livelihood by depriving them of a chance to earn a gainful wage, by not hiring them, not giving them the chance to be considered for the job, or firing them because of their skin color. There are not enough teeth behind those laws today, and there need to be more teeth behind those laws. So those are a few things that I think we could also consider when it comes to what reparations in America could look like. What's your reactions to that, G?
Yeah, I was just kind of reading some of what some people were saying in the chat too.
Okay.
Interesting conversations here going on. But I just want to read one to say replying to. So Rome replied to Joyce. Joyce Williams, think about a policy like stop and frisk. They just stopped bragging about it, doing that. Obviously, a targeted attempt to arrest black men is still going on. Rome says Biden said they were going to legalize marijuana cannabis tax, and there you go. Also, a fund from those corporations will direct and indirect ties to American slavery. Okay. Yeah, I mean, good points. They can also add 1% loans for business startup. There's a number. All these are good points here. I think great points. There are so many different ways how this can be done. I mean, it's mind blowing. And the fact of the matter is that they know it can be. It's just the fact that they don't think that what were the forefathers of this country thinking we actually gave black folks anything. But we know that other groups of people in this country were actually giving money out, starting off with the Native Americans in the 1940s, who were actually giving, I believe it was 100, I forgot how many $1 billion it was. Maybe it was 12 billion. And that was a start. That was a start to give out to 176 tribes. So that was the very start of what we saw reparations happen in this country. But that wasn't the end. That wasn't the only one. You know,
818 million, G.
It was how many?
$818 million.
Okay, I spoke too much. 8. Well, at that time, that money in that time is pretty much billions of dollars.
Oh, that's billions. Yeah, that's in today's money. That's at least $10 billion.
Exactly. In 1946, right?
1946. Yeah.
Yep. So you can imagine that kind of money that was given out to those tribes at that particular time, and now they actually have tribes that are still getting paid today, who don't ever have to work. They just get a check every other week. They get a check in the mail. Okay, they have casinos that are given out to certain tribes. I'm here in the state of Michigan. There are several tribes. Well, there are a couple tribes that own several casinos in this state. They don't have to abide by any state laws. When COVID was shutting down certain casinos in the Detroit area, those casinos stayed open the entire time because they did not have to abide by state laws. So you mean to tell me, and again, they always talk about how, okay, the Native Americans, so it was their land, we stole it from them. Wait a minute. Let's go back in history a little bit further and really understand what really happened here. In fact, there were some people who look just like me who were here before Columbus. If you don't want to believe it or not, do your research. And we've talked about that. We talked about how King was starting to realize his real roots toward the latter parts of his years, and I actually inserted that piece in one of his speeches, in his latter speech. So we understand that The reparations have been given out in this country. So there is a formula for that. They made money and they made room to do that for that particular group, those particular groups of people. So I think that we have everything here. We have all the ideas, we have all the data, we have all the information. It's just the fact of the matter is that it hasn't been done. And we know why it hasn't been done. And so I think that it's going to take think tanks like this that needs actually a bigger platform, and we need you all to help us do that to get the message out, to be able to talk about these things with a larger group, to apply pressure. If it's not going to get done on the local level, then it has to get done on the federal level. And I do believe that it will make more sense to do it on a federal level because we're going to talk about more money. From the local level, I mean, you make a promise a couple of community colleges that can give out free education, which isn't a bad thing. If we can have, let's say, in one particular city, there are 2 local community colleges. If they agree to give free education for African Americans in that particular community, which is only going to make up a small amount of people anyways. Let's be honest about it. We're not a very large population in this country. So if the small population in that particular city can go to school for free, that's a start. Am I happy with that? Am I satisfied? No, because again, it may not necessarily work for everybody's situation. I already might have a degree. So therefore it wouldn't I do have a degree, but I'm saying so it wouldn't affect somebody like me because I already have a degree. But it would affect my son. He can go get a free education. So I will be happy about that, but it wouldn't affect my immediate situation. So I think there are various ways to go about this in terms of either pots of money, pots of things, I should say, education, business startups, farms, actually cutting a check to go about doing this. So I don't think there is no wrong answer tonight. I think us talking about it and getting some ideas from you all is a very good start. Let me read one more comment here from Malachi. I'm currently doing a fundraiser to be able to purchase an African American ancestry test. This is reparations. None of us should have to pay for this information that we're owed. I agree. I mean, there's a documentary out that talks about this, how white people or most people in this country know their ancestry, but Black people don't. And the fact I have to pay, you're right, for me to find out where in the world I come from in the continent of Africa, I should have to pay for that. So you raised a very good point. If that's your form of reparations and you're satisfied with that, I have no problem with that. That may not work for other people. That may not necessarily work for me. But if that's what does it for you, I'm with you. By all means, you should be able to get an ancestry test without having to pay. Okay, he has a GoFundMe page set up. Okay. All right, we'll look at that. We'll take a look at that, Malachi. Thanks for sharing that. But that's my reaction to that, Isaac. That's my reaction to that.
Okay.
Piece.
Well, I think this has been a great conversation, and I know it would have been better if Dr. Paellman was with us, but this is an issue that we will continue to visit periodically, and we will continue to have guests. We were hoping to have someone from NCOBRA on tonight. We'll tell you a little bit more about NCOBRA in just a second. But we want to leave you with some resources so that you can continue to activate, learn more about this cause. If you're curious and want to know more, we're going to do that. And then Malachi, I'm glad you shared that fundraiser with us because the Restitution Study Group that we mentioned earlier that Dr. Paellman has formed, they specialize in helping Black Americans and Black people of African descent to find their ancestry, trace their ancestry back to Africa. We're actually going to be making a donation to her cause, but we make a donation to you as well, Malachi. In fact, in the spirit of reparations, I'm going to make a donation myself. Grant, you can hold off on this one, but I'll put in on Malachi's fundraiser. But also, like I said, Malachi, check with the Restitution Study Group. We're going to share with you that website in just a second. But as we sort of close out here, there are a couple things that we want to leave you with, a couple of great places to find more information about the economics and the social emotional cost of reparations. So the Brookings policy published a report in 2020, which is available online for your consumption. That's a great report for anyone to dig into, especially those that want to get into the numbers of it all. And then Ta-Nehisi Coates, he wrote a masterful article for the Atlantic magazine called "The Case for Reparations" that is fantastic because it not only gets into the numbers, but it also gets into the personal experiences of people that Ta-Nehisi Coates got to know and researched in putting together this fantastic piece. And then Dr. Deadria wrote a book called "From Here to Equality," which is voluminous in nature, is a terrific read, and he's one of the leading scholars who is pushing for and advocating on a sort of like campus level, university level, for an academic level for reparations. And then this is the Restitution Study Group website. This is the group formed by Dr. Paellman that I recommend everyone get in contact with. Fantastic organization, rsgincorp.org. And then for white comrades and brothers and sisters in particular, for my people, that is, there's the Uhuru Solidarity Movement that you can get involved with. They have a reparations virtual conference coming up later this month that you can register for by going to this website. So we urge you to check that out, especially for all of our white brothers and sisters, for my comrades who are listening, to get involved. And then this is the website for NCOBRA. We're hopeful to have them on at a later date when we come back to this topic of reparations, NCOBRAonline.org. Then as we close out, we're really excited about this last piece here. This is our conversation next week. It's called "The End of Policing, An Evening with Alex Vitale." This is the name of a terrific book that he wrote that is important to us. We will be talking with him next week, March 10th, 8 o'clock. And we will double check to make sure he is still available for the event, because we know he has a lot to offer us, and we would hate for him to miss out and for you to miss out if you plan on being with us for that. So the next week, End of Policing conversation, will discuss not only police reform, but the abolishing of police, and how we can realistically envision and imagine that in our society. I think sometimes we think that defunding the police or reforming police practices are the best way to ensure a safe community. But in fact, Vitale has some very different views about that, in which the abolishing of police can make us all more safe and create a more just world here in America. So I'm interested and excited for that conversation. We hope that all of those who are with us tonight will tune in next week for that really terrific station. So that's about all I have, G. It looks like Joyce said Color of Change is doing a reparations study as well with Representative Lee. That's terrific. Thanks for sharing that, Joyce. So check that out, family. Color of Change. Representative Lee, I believe, is the congressperson who created HR 40, if I'm not mistaken. So it's good that they are connecting. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Joyce. I think that's all I got, Brother G.
Yeah, I think that's about it for tonight. We do apologize. Our guest was not able to make it. We may reschedule her for another conversation. As you can see, this conversation can never get old. We'll speak with the same amount of passion as we did tonight, 10 more times, 10, 20, 100 more times until something actually happens. But I hope you got something out of tonight's conversation. I hope it has motivated you or inspired you to do something in your own communities. Again, things can be done on a local level. Apply pressure. Talk to your local municipalities. Talk to your local institutions in terms of educational institutions to bring up ideas of possibly free education as a form of reparations. Take some of the ideas that were talked about in the chat and apply it. But definitely want to see you back here next week for another exciting conversation. Thank you all for those who have stuck with us the entire evening. And we will see you next week.
Real power is people, brother.
Real power is people.